We are a peaceful people. Struggle is we struggle, and we don't look for trouble. Just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we
Thank
ain't
you, honorable
backing
members.
down.
Please be seated.
We ain't giving up no mountains.
We have circulated the address by the His Excellency, President Irfan Ali. So you have that now. You can quote directly from the words of the President in the National Assembly. I now have the pleasure of calling the Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Local Government, the Honorable Member, Mr. Anand Prasad. Minister, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to make my contributions to the motion before this National Assembly for approval of estimates of the public sector and the budget for financial year 2021. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, I am honored to be representing this People's Progressive Party civic government during its hallmark and historic presentation of yet another budget in 6 months' tenure in office. I wish at the outset to offer congratulations for a job well done by the Minister of Finance in the Office of the President, Dr. Ashni Kumar Singh, and his budget team. Never have I heard a more inspiring budget presentation. Mr. Speaker, this year's budget presented under the theme A Path to Recovery, Economic Dynamism and Resilience is indicative of this government's commitment to further restarting the pursuit for the Guyanese dream by enabling the macroeconomic fundamentals and policies in a safe, progressive, and productive environment that could lead to growth and development of all Guyanese at home and in the diaspora. Mr. Speaker, the size of the budget 2021 is $383.1 billion as compared to the 2020 budget that stood at $329.5 billion, which is 9.6% or $28.8 billion above the 2019 budget, 2020 budget. And finally, this budget embodies the plans and promises that this PPPC government made to the Guyanese people for a better life through measures using a unique approach that will guarantee them a living standard on par, if not better, than our neighbors. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 comes at a time when there is need still for the opposition end. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 comes at a time when there is need still for the opposition's end to their policy of political gangsterism and political hypocrisy. They had all the time to do all they wanted for the Guyanese people. And what did they do? They wasted it. Plunder and steal the people's money or resources. Break up and criticize everything that was working and failed to replace it. Take the hard-earned jobs away from our people substituting them with perilous plans and unthinkable farcical ideas that never got fully off the ground. Mr. Speaker, before I go further, I need to reply to the Honorable Member Mahipal. It was a shameful and despicable presentation this afternoon. We on this side of the House is concerned and committed about the development of this country. Honorable Mahipal, the opposition members, please stop blowing hot air in this chamber. Honorable Member Mahipal, you have flouted the public service rules by disclosing information of the ministry, and further, to let you know, because you have flouted it, you will be dealt with. I need to mention Mr. Speaker, let me remind the honorable member that it was on July 13th, 2020, while the APNU AFC led by Granger and his acolytes were trying to rig the elections to steal the democratic right of the Guyanese people to vote for a party of their choice. And on that date, from Michael Joseph, who was the finance secretary of the Ministry of Finance, said, and I quote, "It has been brought to my attention that several staff members are involved in discussions and posting on social media and public fora matters concerning the government's business and political affairs. As public servants, you should conduct yourselves with regards to the tenets of confidentiality and objectivity, being the state of keeping or being kept secret or private or of our knowledge of government business, and a lack of bias, judgment, or prejudice while performing our duties competently. According to the public service rules in relation to public servants and the press, members of staff by regulation must not in any time during his or her engagement make public or disclose to any person any information as to the practice or as to any other matters concerning the government's business which may come to his knowledge in the course of his engagement and or involved in any political discussion whereby the operations of the government as a whole comes into discourse. Anyone found in breach of this regulation shall be subjected to disciplinary action." Signed, Michael Joseph. I need to add, Mr. Speaker, that before a public servant is elected to this National Assembly, he or she must resign from the public service. You have flouted the Constitution of this country like Granger and his cabal did. Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House, we will not waste our time in office enriching ourselves with the things from our people like the famous gold bracelet, expensive watches, chains, multi-million-dollar food bills, drink bills, and such excesses. And it reminds me about the 5 Bs. It reminds me of the 5 Bs: beds, bangles, bracelets, bed sheets, and bands. How low can you stoop? How low can you stoop? Bed sheets from poor public servants. Mr. Speaker, we are here to work hard and labor for our Guyanese people, putting our backs to the wheel of innovation, change, and making our industries develop. Budget 2021 aims at building cohesive and stronger communities and regions through a no-nonsense approach to the task of institutional capacity and building. This budget keeps in line with our developmental needs and priorities. As you heard from the private sector, the business community, the normal man, the pensioner, and the young people, Budget 2021 has incentives and right plans this time around. Mr. Speaker, last year, a total of $28 million were earmarked to be spent under the Policy Development Administration in the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development. This money was spent. It doesn't mean stealing people's votes. It doesn't mean that. This money was spent tackling the poverty reduction and job creation needs for our people. We spent the last 6 months making critical investments in our solid waste management programs and local market upgrade, which serve thousands of residents on a daily basis. Mr. Speaker, I am ashamed to say the status of the project implementation and design under the APNU AFC government, I heard horrifying stories of the game of politics being played with communities and municipalities throughout this country. The ministry's projects and programs were being wagered as a political tool for control and influence. NDCs were starved of resources, and the RDCs were not getting attention as it should. Mr. Speaker, some rehabilitation work was done last year to the Alboystown market, making it more accessible to residents and more user-friendly to the vendors. East Rhineveld Market could have been completed due to non-cooperation by the MNCC. However, efforts will be made to have this market completed before the end of March 2021. Mr. Speaker, imagine the AFC APNU spent millions of dollars on markets rehabilitation, and today the percentage of occupancy of these markets is less than 40%. For example, the Kitty market. Mr. Speaker, the approach by the last administration has confirmed that they were clueless when it comes to making lasting and sensible strategic investments. Today, I can proudly report that the first phase of the Monrepo market is almost completed. This market is among the biggest of the markets in Guyana. Local democratic organs got improved subventions where needed in the 2020 budget, making sure that there were public participation and consultancy with their constituents in the local governance arena. In 2020, the ministry equipped 6 NDCs with much needed furniture and equipment, which was not catered for by the last administration. A few buildings were constructed, but guess what? No furniture or equipment were catered for. Buildings left unoccupied for months until the PPPC administration came to power. On September the 2nd, 2020. A review is presently being done for a 3-year strategic plan and analysis for constituency with the National Policy Directive to determine their utility for future interventions for 5 municipalities: Linden, Bartica, Georgetown, New Amsterdam, and Lethem. In 2020, there was improved access to drainage and access roads across all regions. The construction of 5 culverts across the region were also completed. These will improve the roadways to reduce maintenance costs due to erosion caused during heavy rainfall, thereby benefiting approximately 12,000 people and come at a cost of $18.5 million. Mr. Speaker, the construction of revetment at Bamboo Dam Charity was done last year at a cost of $9.4 million to halt aggressive erosion of the banks of the creek and secure properties of approximately 50 residents that live in close proximity and approximately 200 farmers. Persons cannot complain now of political partisan any longer. Mr. Speaker, we upgraded roads in Horstelling, Body Scheme, Gaisuko Scheme, and Covent Garden at a cost of approximately $34 million. These roads will provide easy access to ingress and egress for the residents within these communities. In Region 5, $10 million was spent on general rehabilitation and upgrading of Ballfield Street, the Edward Village, to benefit the residents. Similarly, in Region 5, Mr. Speaker, we rehabilitated Bushnot Cross Street at a cost of over $12 million to benefit 50 households. In Region 7, the PPPC government installed water systems at Wax Creek Primary School at a cost of $7 million. In Region 8, the construction of an all-weather road from Monkey Mountain to Paramakatoy at a cost of over $71 million, thereby causing a reduction in time and cost associated with the transport of goods and accessing services in communities. Mr. Speaker, in Region 9, we saw the construction of a bridge at Pauishau, 15 feet by 56 feet, concrete and wood structure at a cost of over $12 million. Mr. Speaker, no bridge was ever constructed at this location before. This will assist in easy and timely travel from the region, including the mining areas. Finally, in Region 10, we continued upgrading a tract of land, the Carriageway Millie's Hideout, at a cost of over $13 million. This will lead to the continued enhancement and provision of easy transport network of farm produce from farmlands in Berbice River communities to residents in Linden and Georgetown. The investment of this infrastructure is essential, and it increases farmers' access to input and output markets. It stimulates the rural non-farm economy and vitalizes rural villages. It also increases consumer demand and facilitates the integration of rural areas into national and international economies. Therefore, the latter half of 2020, we at the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development did a remarkable task in completing the projects and getting them up and running. Mr. Speaker, as you are aware, we have started probes into monies that were allegedly squandered by ministers and others, including those that posed as business persons, starting up incomplete barbershops, pig farms, to name a few, and commencing all manner of questionable projects. 4 names, Mr. Speaker, comes to mind: Christopher, Vincent, Jermaine, and David. David, Jermaine, Christopher, and Vincent. 4 corrupt names. The Apple AFC administration spent their time taking the monies from the Guyanese people and diverting.
Honorable Minister, I see on the floor the Honorable Chief Whip for the opposition.
Standing Order 41A.
Honorable Member, Mr. Jones.
The honourable member is impugning improper motive on the names that he referenced to in the House. And we beg that he either withdraw it or apologize.
Honorable Member, I don't recognize that as a point of order. He's impugning names. Names. I don't know if those names apply to which persons. Like we say in the Bible, Matthew, Luke.
The Apto AFC administration spent their time taking the monies from the Guyanese people and diverting it to their rich and greedy so-called business persons, allegedly. Just look at the Harbor Bridge for a prime example of taxpayers' dollars going to waste behind poor policies of the Apto AFC government. The $488 million spent on a dull and humdrum project did not amount to the functionality of the asphalt plant. In an article of the Guyana Times dated 3rd January 2021, my colleague, the Minister of Public Works, stated, "It is non-operational. They are waiting on some expert to come with some parts to make it operational." Another excuse was COVID that prevented the asphalt plant from up and running. What a shame, Mr. Speaker. And yet you want to tell us, APNU AFC, about accountability and transparency? Mr. Speaker, these double standards on the side of the opposition resulted in them taking millions, so to speak, from our hard-working Guyanese to fund the now wasteful and directionless Cherry Jagan expansion project, which we designed during our last tour in government. This project had to be redesigned to make it compatible with the needs of a modern airport. Mr. Speaker, the thievery and in compassion to new heights was their installation of increased taxes on almost everyone who was struggling to make ends meet. As it is popularly said, I don't know about you, but the taxes for me. More than 200 taxes, no coordinated approach, no phased approach, no sensible reason. The so-called gangsterism had gone to newer heights. They were sucking the blood like Christopher, like David, like Jermaine, and like Henry. They were sucking the blood life out of an already devastated and physically well-known as financially depressed Guyana. Let me be lucid here. We on this side of the house believe in equality and equitable sharing of Guyana's resources. We do not go to one village, skip the other, like what the APNU did. We believe every Guyanese must share our wealth, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, or social class. Our vision is colorblind when it comes to establishing a developed Guyana. But the opposition wants Guyana to believe that they're saints and can't do anything wrong, but the entire country, the Guyanese people, know better. End your racism, APNU AFC. Stop dividing our country in your quest for power. All you did in the last 5 years was complain and lied in office. And mind you, you will not be there for a long, very long time. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention and will focus on Budget 2021. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt in my mind that there were massive amounts of irregularities and financial malpractices occurring over the past 5 years. A closer analysis revealed that the local government organs were weak and poorly managed, thereby creating a limited service to Guyanese people. Who is to blame? Who is to blame? The APNU AFC cabal. They were too caught up in trying to hide from the media who had questions about their scandals. Let me say emphatically that President Irfan Ali's government will continue to work on collaborating with all local government organs to get the best possible results in 2021 and beyond. They will benefit from technical support to perform their constitutional roles and functions. Mr. Speaker, this government aims to adopt a long-term sustainable development plan to utilize the vast potential of communities, municipalities, and regions, culminating in an improved quality of life for all. The impact of COVID-19 pandemic has stymied local economic development, community development, and will continue to do so in the short term and medium term. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to support community entrepreneurial businesses through the SLED project. SLED is a deliberate intervention to promote economic development at the grassroots level in the AVCs, the NDCs, municipalities, and regions. SLED is intended to boost socio-economic development by increasing job opportunities, providing capital to local micro and small enterprises. Mr. Speaker, during the APNU AFC time in office, they spent huge sums of monies from the SLED fund that benefit members of their parties and cronies. Large sums of monies were given to Christopher, Vincent, Jermaine, and David, and others, to name a few, at the front and center. The APNU AFC showed no remorse for the normal man, their handful of supporters, or the ordinary Guyanese. They stickle their hands like a pig in a pot and pull out the gold bracelet. What a shame. Mr. Speaker, we are quite different. We are a responsible government. We have budgeted a whopping $150 million in 2021 to provide economic opportunities for our people. This allocation will be an increase from $105 million provided in 2020 and will support the expanded sphere of impact across all 10 regions in different areas. Mr. Speaker, a provision of $1.172 billion under the SIP for markets, NDC buildings, and community enhancement works. The PPPC administration is committed to local government strengthening and development. Pivotal to such development is the strengthening of services provided by the NDCs and the municipalities. The AFC administration neglected the NDCs. Buildings were left in a dilapidated state with basic facilities absent, causing staff and residents to be forced to conduct business in an unsafe and undesirable environments. APNU AFC left their mark as just how fragile our democratic structure could be. But Mr. Speaker, we have corrected that. In 2021, rehabilitation construction works will be done in Annandale, Riverstown, NDC building, Aberdeen, Zorgenflock, NDC building, Legwan, NDC building, Canefield Enterprise, NDC building, Blackbush Polars, NDC building, and number 52, number 574, NDC building. Another $130 million will be invested in the developmental works at Charity, Parika, and Monrico markets. Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Minister, honorable member, you will need an extension to continue.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to ask for a 5-minute extension for my colleague to conclude his presentation.
Thank you, honorable member, Mr. Shearer. Honorable Minister,
Mr.
you
Speaker,
may continue.
Here are some of the PPP manifesto promises we kept so far. Reducing the cost of basic food and other household items, reducing water tariffs, reducing the cost of construction and home ownership by zero rating certain construction materials, reducing the cost of connectivity, supporting our school children $15,000 cash grant, supporting the elderly by the increasing of old age pensions from $20,000 to $25,000 with effect of January 1st, 2021. Mr. Speaker, I heard during this debate from 31 empty vessels making noise about salary increases. Mr. Speaker, please allow me the privilege to inform these honorable men and women on that side of the House to read the 2021 budget in depth. It seems they need fiscal glasses with 21 vision to see past their noses and understand English language and mathematics. Account 6141 was previously known as revision of wages and salaries, but it is now known as the other employment cost. It has more than $10 billion budgeted for the salary increases for workers under the heading Policy Administration. So APNU can run around like headless chickens, like the honorable members Sherrod Duncan, the honorable Joseph Harmon could have something to entice the public so they can achieve their 1-minute fame on Village Voice and in the ring. But they will have to punch harder in that ring, because we on this side of the House, we float like butterflies and we sting like bees. We on the government side are livid, and we are ready with this budget. Mr. Speaker, all these incentives being offered in Budget 2021 will put us back on the road to economic recovery, even as the COVID-19 pandemic has set back the world economically. Mr. Speaker, let me emphatically state to all Guyanese to come on board and join with the PPPC government in developmental transformation of this dear land of ours, which will commence after and definitely after the passage of this budget. As of today, we need to engage in a countrywide conversation for one common goal, one Guyana. Only then we can achieve our national motto of one people, one nation, one destiny. Mr. Speaker, I stand before this honorable House in the hollow walls of this Parliament and commend the visionary budget to this House as my PPPC colleagues did. Commendations once again to Dr. Ashni Kumar Singh and his budget team for assisting him in bringing this budget to this honorable House. Colleagues, two simple words to remember: one Guyana. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister within the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development, the Honorable Member, Mr. Anand Prasad. Honorable members, we will now hear from the Honorable Member, Mr. Richard Sinkle.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. I want to thank the electorate for allowing me this opportunity to come to this honored house to say something about a path to recovery, economic dynamism, and resilience. But first of all, I'd like to thank the public servants who worked assiduously to help put together this issue. I want to quote from page 13 of 77. That speaks to the labor man who stopped at Roger Hines. In 2020, recognizing the hardship of COVID-19, we provide amongst totaling $7 billion for every household to receive relief in the form of an unconditional cash transfer of $25,000. I'd like to start on that point. Mr. Speaker, this is what you call broken cistern that holds no water. My colleague before talked about the pink slip. I would like to bring your memory back to after the last budget presentation. I happened to be in a village on the quarantine, and I approached the team of people who were supposed to share grants to every household. Lo and behold, a swarm of people, yes sir, a set of people came to me to say they were told by the team of persons who were sharing the grants, who happened to be PPP acolytes from Brighton Village. Now, sir, they were told that in one house, that's a tenant, I thought that that tenant would need more money than the person who owned the house. And they were told that they were not entitled to this grant. They also the owner of the house lives abroad, but they are living there. The other thing too, Mr. Speaker, my brother was told by the same team that they had no pink slips. He wouldn't lie like you. Mr. Speaker, I confronted the leader of the team. He promised faithfully he will be back there the next day. They were driving with a Region 6 vehicle, sir. The next day I had to go to do some business about 3 miles away. And I saw them lunching there also. I confronted them. They promised again the second time, Mr. Speaker, that they will come the day after to deal with the pink slip that wasn't there. To my surprise, they were 2 days after I saw them 9 miles away. It would seem to me that this pink slip is very elusive. And therefore, I would say to this House, Mr. Speaker, that that's a broken promise. This household is a broken promise. Now, let me bring you to Region 8. Campbelltown. Campbelltown is where they selected the acolytes to share the grants. And therefore, I thought when you're sharing from one house, from one village to the next. But surprisingly, Mr. Speaker, they moved from Campbelltown on selective households, and then moved to Princeville, and then moved to Mycovey, and all about the place. So I am confused at this point, Mr. Speaker. What constitutes household and house-to-house giving? My conclusion then, Mr. Speaker, like the concerns of the people of Region 8, is that this COVID grant, this 25,000 reliefs, is money that came out of the coffers of the PPP. I am going to talk a little now about elections. There are 4 members of parliament sitting in this parliament who sat at a meeting. In fact, it was a meeting to select the RDC Council of Region 8. That building, Mr. Speaker, if you talk about corruption, that building was repaired at least 3 times before it went into use, and that's prior to 2015. Mr. Speaker, I sat on the board, the tender board for the region. When you talk about equity and fairness, they were the persons who constitute that tender board were pastors, public officers, Richard Sinclair. That contractor that got all the contract was the REO's friend prior to 2015. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, that building had to be repaired at least 3 times before it was livable for students. And what is surprising, Mr. Speaker, where they sat on the head table, just behind there is a kitchen. But then also, that kitchen wasn't convenient, so another kitchen was built. Mr. Speaker, broken sisters, all they're doing is payback. Payback for work that was done during elections. Mr. Speaker, I was invited also to a COVID task force meeting as a parliamentarian. This meeting, Mr. Speaker, The police even asked, it stated that they are still awaiting a charge for the person I know who broke the window of a hospital. And Mr. Speaker, even in war times, people do not destroy hospitals. But this person, I don't want to commit myself, this person got at least 17 contracts. Mr. Speaker, in this yard, that contractor's son came out on this robotic class with me. Yeah? Mr. Speaker, that there's another dimension to this thing. I arrived in Maja in 2004 as a head teacher and discovered that it took them 6 months to provide accommodation for the head teacher. Rather, they would have, and that was from East Rhineville. And it took them 6 months to offer a living quarter for the head teacher. Rather, they were going to give accommodation to an acting teacher. That is corruption. Mr. Speaker, and adding to that, I am privy to the fact that a person who had taken home a salary of $45,000 between the time I arrived in Maja and before 2015, that person was able to save, Mr. Speaker, and purchase an excavator for $38 million. And Mr. Speaker, auditors were asked to go in to audit that same department. But as it is practical, as it's practiced, just before an election, these people resign. And after the election, they go back to work. Mr. Speaker, I was privileged to work as a young teacher in another village. And in that village, I happened to be a poll clerk. 1975-76. There is where I discovered that at 10 in the morning, an elderly woman would come and vote with one name and an ID number, and the same name and number will appear with a younger person the same afternoon. If you talk about stealing elections, that's stealing elections. Punishment or rewards are sometimes offered to friends and cronies. I visited a poll station just recently, and this poll station, a polling station rather, the presiding officers are friends of mine. They are teachers, both presiding officer and deputy presiding officer. But I guess they are given scholarships. They are now going to be in Georgetown at the University of Guyana. Good. Payback time. Scholarships to study. Scholarships to study. In my hand here, Mr. Speaker, in my hand here, I have a document. This document is a document that is from a frontline worker. The date of this document, this is a government slip, government receipt, is not Approved Coalition's receipt. The 4th of February 2015. At the last, Mr. Speaker, at the last budget debate, I talk about this one stop one shop. This person cannot receive their they can't receive their title yet, but there are others who've gotten theirs. On Instagram, Mr. Speaker, I noticed that a certain community on the west coast of Demerara, thousands of people would be benefiting from water supply. I took the time off, Mr. Speaker, to go down to that same place. And when I went there, I saw 2 complete housing. The rest will be bushes. So I guess the thousands of people will benefit.
Mr. Speaker, 40A.
Honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honorable member is trying to finish his presentation. He's
Point of
attempting
order.
to finishing his presentation.
The point of order.
I said 40A, sir.
Yeah.
And I'm asking, sir, if
where
you
is
can
the
please-
violation of 40A?
Pardon?
Where is the violation of 40A?
I'm not trying to understand what you're asking me.
Where is-
You need me to read 40. Okay, 40A says, by rising on a point of order, when the member speaking shall resume in his or her seat, and the member interrupting shall simply direct attention to the point which he or she is desirous to bring to notice.
I didn't see anybody standing to interrupt. You stand to interrupt.
Yes,
So
I'm
I'm
now
asking for the point of order. I don't recognize that as a point of order. Honorable member, Mr. Sinclair, you'll get back to your 30 seconds.
How much time more am I entitled to, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker,
You
in
have
that
30
same
seconds on the original 15 minutes, and we can give you an extension of
In
5.
that same region, Mr. Speaker, I walked the laterite roads and so established a reading center to improve students' literacy. Mr. Speaker, that building was renovated by myself and the VSO from Portugal. It's like a carpenter from ERC, Ethnic Relations Commission, where we sat together. Mr. Speaker, the building after it was renovated and stocked with books became a storehouse. That is what you call...
Honorable members, please, I'm finding it difficult to hear the honorable member, Mr. Sinclair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is what you call corruption. That is what you call corruption. So when the honorable members on that side of the house want to hear something about corruption, they must... Now, Mr. Speaker, let's talk about this budget. This budget for me is a broken sister.
Okay, honorable
that
member,
goes
before you
on.
talk about this budget, we'll need to give you an extension. Honorable member, Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Comrade Speaker. Comrade Speaker, I do move if the honorable member could be given 10 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Honorable member, Mr. Jones, the standing orders got some specific directions. And it also says once there is an agreement on time allocation, we use that. The agreement we have is 5 minutes extension.
So guided, Comrade Speaker. I was hoping the Honorable Chief Whip would have healed, but so guided, sir.
Thank you very much, honorable member. Honorable member, Mr. Sinclair, your 5 minutes to conclude
Mr. Speaker,
will start now.
Mr. Speaker, Region 8 would like to have relief from tax measures, especially water tax as announced by the Honorable Minister of Finance. But in that region, we depend mostly, Mr. Speaker, on water from creeks, Region 8. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, this budget measure for tax relief will not meet the ordinary people in Region 8. Region 8 enjoys the privileges from the APNU coalition government, Mr. Speaker, of a concrete road. And I am certain that those 4 members of this 12th Parliament would have seen it and worked on it, including the Honorable Minister of Information in the Office of the Prime Minister. But he was escorted by the person who is now a member of the Regional Tender Board, Mr. Speaker, and that member of the board must report directly to a member of this Parliament. That is broken system. Mr. Speaker, that township, Mr. Speaker, has buildings in it that would require certain organized things. And in my bag here, Mr. Speaker, I have some documents for people from the North Pakaraimas who need to have names, but there is no register office, no GRO. There is no resident, no passport office. But it's now under construction thanks to the APNU AFC administration, Mr. Speaker. These are, so I want to demand, Mr. Speaker, the teachers, the nurses, the policemen, they're all looking forward for something tangible from this budget. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I can only support this budget if it provides at least a 10% across the board wages. And so, Mr. Speaker, finally, I am one of the teachers who work and raise the maths bar by 10%. And therefore, I'm not there teaching anymore, Mr. Speaker. That is what Mr. Kwame, Honorable Kwame Mackay, is doing with my region, Mr. Speaker. They do not want to see development. I guess, Mr. Speaker, I would be very happy if this government side of the bench had consulted with the APNU people. In fact, I visited the Department of Education there and offered some ideas in terms of what is needed for consideration in this budget, which I thought I said to them was capacity building. And therefore, I think I can extend the privilege to my honorable student there, my former student, of course, for some capacity building. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Thank you, Honorable Member, Mr. Sinclair, and I guess your presentation was very well received because it was one of the loudest cheers we had. Honorable members, I want to bring to your attention from our handbook, page 57. 2 members today, this evening, the 2 last speakers did quote people from documents. And once you're going to quote from the document, you need to immediately submit those documents to the clerk and the parliamentary reporters. And secondly, as we continue to reach the high point of the budget presentation, that same page has a list of words that we do not use in Parliament. And I'll ask that this evening we can refresh our memories with those words. On that note, let me now invite the Honorable Member, Ms. Sarah Brown, to make her presentation. Honorable Member, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I wish to rebut a few of the comments made by the previous speaker, but right now I'm currently lost in Region 8. So, Mr. Speaker, it's with much pride that I humbly rise to support Budget 2021 being presented to this National Assembly under the theme, A Path to Recovery, Economic Dynamism and Resilience, to a whopping sum of $383 billion, financed with no new taxes. In the same breath, Mr. Speaker, I join the many speakers before me in congratulating the team from the Ministry of Finance and the Honorable Dr. Ashni Kumar Singh for this well thought out and compiled budget. In the words of Dr. Ashni Singh, and I quote, Budget 2021 seeks to ensure that we recover as a country both from 2020 and the last 5 years of trauma. It puts in place the policies needed to catalyze rapid economic growth in the near and medium term, and it lays the foundation needed to ensure that growth is not transitory but is sustainable for the long term. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 is the second step towards achieving our manifesto commitment to the Guyanese people, since billions were already expended in our emergency budget 2020. And already, Mr. Speaker, the economy is growing, businesses are surviving amidst the pandemic, and the country is progressing. Mr. Speaker, I wish to rebut Mr. Mahipal, Honourable Member, in his presentation where he said that at no time the REOs worked against the elected official. Mr. Speaker, in 2019, as an elected vice chair of the RDC Region Number 1, we were completely denied access to line item 6211, expenses specific to the agency earmarked for the RDC's functions, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member also compared the allocation in 6211 for Region Number 4 compared to Region Number 1. May I remind, Mr. Speaker, the member that the line item 6211 in Region 1 caters for Tushao and senior councillors' stipend, of which, Mr. Speaker, an annual sum of $8,640,000 for a total of 24 Tushaos and 10 senior councillors to a annual sum of $2.4 million is also included in the 6211 line item, Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Local Government, the previous Minister of Local Government, was more concerned with balkanizing the country and imposing regional flags within a nation when our sovereignty at that time was under threat. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2020 saw investments in all sectors of the country's economy, especially, Mr. Speaker, in the sector closest to my heart, investment in Amerindian development. And sad to say, Mr. Speaker, the sector that was the most neglected under the APNU-AFC's term in office. Many of the speakers on the other side of the House made reference to hinterland development, and the communities in focus were Mabaruma, Madia, Letem, and Bartica. Mr. Speaker, these areas alone, it's not the hinterland. What about villages like Cariaco and the entire Barama River, who have never seen any minister of the APNU-AFC government, except for one who went to neighboring Yakishur to campaign days before the elections? Mr. Speaker, yes. Mr. Speaker, already in this pandemic, an allocation of $1.7 billion was disbursed across Amerindian villages across the 10 regions for villagers to execute a project of their choice in an effort to help stimulate the local village economy at a time when we desperately need this intervention. Mr. Speaker, villages are buzzing with activities as the COVID-19 relief grant was given to complement the annual presidential grant, an initiative too that was birthed under the PPPC administration. Mr. Speaker, I wish to remind Honorable Dawn Hastings, who in her presentation asked, what could $10 million do for villages? Mr. Speaker, I wish to invite that member to take a look at the brilliant proposals made by village councils. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, many village councils are doing way better than the previous government. For they failed to implement any new CDP, where villages had access to $5 million under this project. Mr. Speaker, under the COVID-19 relief grant, villages across Region 1 benefited from a total of $542 million, Honorable Member Ronald Cox. Region 2, $105 million. Region 3, $23 million. Region 4, $47 million. Region 5, $15 million. 6, $30 million. 7, $216 million. Region 8, $208 million. Region 9, Honorable Member Mr. Henry, $454 million, and Region 10, $92 million. That, Mr. Speaker, is an investment made by a caring government. And that is just in addition to the 100 tractors that were procured in Budget 2020 to be distributed among villages across the hinterland that have not benefited from a tractor or trailer. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 caters for the chipper and plow to accompany these 100 tractors, so our farmers too can benefit from the resources of this country. Further, Mr. Speaker, the ADF accounts for $1.5 billion in Budget 2021 and contains projects for every sector, ranging from women, youth, sports, agriculture, education, farm-to-market roads, to name a few. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that my Indigenous colleagues on the other side, with the exception of Mr. Schuman, will not say no to this development. Then seek to justify their actions like they did before 2015, when the then combined opposition in the parliament mercilessly massacred the Amerindian Development Fund, giving us $1. And as a result, Mr. Speaker, myself and other young Amerindians and other leaders had to take to the streets in front of the parliament building protesting for them to release our budget. Where much to our dismay, Mr. Speaker, counter-protesters sent by the APNU-AFC lined the streets, hurling racial and vulgar comments to deter us, Mr. Speaker. But we stood tall like a tree planted by the riverside. We did not move. Mr. Speaker, evidently, like any other grouping, we too hold a special place in this inclusive government. Mr. Speaker, the young, vibrant, energetic, and efficient President, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Irfan Ali, in his powerful inaugural presentation to this House, dedicated time to highlight our government's views on the development of Amerindians. And I'm certain that his presentation and the projects we have started to implement and those that will be executed in Budget 2021 have left the Indigenous representatives in this House with nothing much to bring to the floor, since many of the interventions are already in motion. And I know that many of them have now resorted to being, for example, the Shadow Minister of Education. Mr. Speaker, the President in his speech committed to the updating of the Amerindian Act after consultation with every Amerindian community, something that the APNU-AFC failed to do with 2 ministers and demitted office without leaving any paper trail of any work that was done. Mr. Speaker, the President committed to improving the lives of Amerindians by improving education, health facilities, and housing and infrastructure development. Already, Mr. Speaker, there is $630 million to expedite the Amerindian land titling project, again which the APNU-AFC failed miserably to make roads into. Mr. Speaker, this budget seeks to remove duties on ATVs for use in the hinterland, a welcome initiative, especially for those of us living in the mountains, where this is often our best or only mode of transportation. Mr. Speaker, In Budget 2021, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs has earmarked 9 ATVs for use in villages in Region 8, which were forsaken by the APNU AFC. And no, Mr. Speaker, Madia is not Region 8, Parmakatoy is not Region 8. Mr. Speaker, there are ATVs earmarked, 4 ATVs earmarked for Region 9. There are 3 buses for Region 1, and there's also boat and engines for a few of the riverine communities. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 is fulfilling the commitment made in our manifesto to return the YEAP or the CSO program, which was vindictively disbanded by the previous government, taking bread out of the mouth of 2,000 young people across the hinterland, and then replaced with haze, which has been inactive, mind you, inactive for at least 1 year before they were catapulted into the opposition. Then to have the honorable member, Don Hastings, come to this house to ask us to keep the HASTE program, which they themselves could not keep or maintain as a government. Not to mention the millions unaccounted for under the HASTE program. Shame, shame, shame. Mr. Speaker, in Budget 2021, $820 million is to be utilized for the execution of the CSO YEAP program, where youths from 213 villages will be trained in various disciplines. And this training, Mr. Speaker, does not cater for training in oil and gas, training in climate change, tourism, ICT, and also agro-processing, of which Amerindians will also benefit from under this inclusive government. In addition to this, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs budget caters for intervention for women and youths in the form of additional grants for economic venture. Mr. Speaker, things are happening in Guyana. Yes, things are happening. Already, we have disbursed our uniform allowance to every child in the public school for 2020. Already, there has been an increase in old age pension. Already, we have received $25,000 per household. And yes, the pink slip for phase 2. We have already received $15,000 in 2021 budget. We will receive $15,000 cash grant for every child in the public school. Vaccination for COVID-19 has already been given to our frontline workers who risk their lives daily on the front line to serve us, for which we are extremely grateful. Mr. Speaker, unprecedented development across the hinterland. Already in our emergency budget, over $300 million was spent to upgrade hinterland roads. And in Budget 2021, in excess of $400 million will be spent to continue where we left off. And as I speak, Mr. Speaker, I cannot wait to return to my home village, where I will be stepping out on a spanking new concrete road in the Santa Rosa Village, Muruka sub-region, region number 1. Mr. Speaker, I note that the honorable geographical member for Region 1 didn't say much with regards to representation for his constituency. And the reason for this is quite simple, Mr. Speaker. We have been doing our job as a government, and as a result, the opposition is becoming irrelevant. And thus, I encourage them to reflect on the well-known local saying, if you can't beat them, then you join them. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member made reference to agriculture development and lamented that the sums allocated were too small. And it makes me wonder whether the member was asleep for the 5 years his government was in office, when the support for Akusha ants, bait, or poison was taken from our people. And that, Mr. Speaker, is returned in Budget 2021. May I gently remind the member that the Minister of Agriculture then never visited the agriculture communities in Region 1. But then again, Mr. Speaker, after a certain age, our movements become limited. Mr. Speaker, The regional budget for 2021 Agricultural Development Program caters for the empowering of 100 acres of farmland in the St. Anselm Village, Burima River. Mr. Speaker, no farmland, none, was surrounded by the APNU AFC government in Region 1. To add, Mr. Speaker, the poultry pens that the honourable member alluded to are earmarked for the 3 resident schools in Matakai, Moruko, and Mabruma to aid in the school's agricultural program. Mr. Speaker, in budget...
Honourable member, you will need an extension.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask for an extension for the honourable member for 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, honourable member.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Shearer, honourable member, you may proceed.
in budget 2021, the Kamaka District Hospital will be retrofitted to accommodate a theatre and an ICU fully furnished with operating tables, theatre lights, backup, outlets, and gas and vacuum system. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, there is the construction of an infectious disease building and an MCH building at the said hospital. We will also be constructing a maternal waiting home for the Moruko sub-region, all in an effort to make our mothers safe and comfortable with the ultimate goal of reducing maternal and child deaths. Mr. Speaker, there is also the construction of a vaccination cold storage unit at the Mabruma and the Port Kaituma Hospital. Mr. Speaker, upgrading of electricity. The coalition government promised 24 hours electricity to the town of Mabruma, and they did not deliver. Since assuming office, Mr. Speaker, we have moved the supply from 16 to 24 hours in Mabruma and from 9 to 15 hours in the Moruko sub-region. And in budget 2021, we will also establish new grids at Kamwata Mabruma and Kamwata Moruko. Mr. Speaker, we will construct schools in Tasawini in the Matakai sub-region, Yarakita in the Mabruma sub-region. We'll also extend Santa Rosa Secondary, St. Nicholas Primary, Hostorora Primary, Matthews Ridge Primary. In addition, we'll construct laundry buildings at the Santa Rosa Secondary and the Port Kaituma Secondary Dormitory. Mr. Speaker, I think that now you understand why the honourable member could not make a meaningful representation, because it is all registered in budget 2021 if it was not done in budget 2020. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to close by making mention of His Excellency's speech at the opening ceremony of the 12th Parliament on February 11th. And he said, and I quote, "As the President of Guyana and the head of government, my credo and the credo of this government is nation building. The key word of my government is oneness. The essential character of my government is inclusion. Stop being defined by race. Stop being defined by politics. Start being defined by our one nationality and by our common love for our country. Let us lift it up, and by doing so, let us lift up each other and ourselves." End of quote. Budget 2021 is an exceptional and comprehensive document that, when implemented, will reflect one Guyana. Join me and support this budget, my friends on the other side. Mr. Speaker, I thank you and I commend this budget to this honourable House.
Thank you, honourable member. Ms. Brown, it's an honour for me to call on the honourable member, Mr. Jermaine Figueira, to make his contribution.
Mr. Speaker, I was informed that the devil was in this house. A traitor, Mr. Speaker. And we on this side of the house, on behalf of all Guyanese, want to register our rebuke on behalf of that individual and let him know that he is not welcome here, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I am happy to join my competent colleagues on this side of the House in congratulating the staff at the Ministry of Finance who work on this budget 2021
Mr. Speaker.
and to inform
Honorable
Mr.
Member,
Speaker.
Minister Teixeira.
Yes, Standing Order 4, Chair, Mr. Speaker. What is the honourable member talking about the devil being here? This cannot be said in this house. This is not.
Honorable Member, Mr. Teixeira, I don't uphold that as a standing order.
Sit.
Honorable members,
Thank
and
you, Mr.
especially the
Speaker.
Honorable Member, Mr. Germain, I heard you giving orders to the Honorable Member to sit. That's my job.
Thank you for doing your job.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, before I was rudely interrupted by the honorable member, permit me to congratulate the staff at the Ministry of Finance who work on Budget 2021 and to inform them, Mr. Speaker, that they are not responsible for the multitude of shortcomings in Budget 2021. A budget, Mr. Speaker, that is an invisible enemy of the good life for the poor, our senior citizens, and hardworking public servants. Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House will continue to expose the illusion of this budget, the fanciful illusion of this budget, Mr. Speaker, that is being foisted on the Guyanese people. A budget that does not in any regard or in any serious way addresses the real hardcore realities that confronts the poor, the vulnerable, and hardworking people of this country. Equally so, sir, it does not offer any real, tangible, and workable solutions for the devastating impact this deadly COVID-19 virus is having on our society, especially for small businesses, formal and informal. But, Mr. Speaker, before I adumbrate further the APNU AFC's position on this fairy tale, far from reality budget, I wish to place on record the sacrilegious precedent that materialized on the day of Mr. Ali's inaugural address to this parliament of this country, Mr. Speaker. On that fateful day,
Honorable Member,
Mr. Speaker,
you got to show some respect.
His Excellency, Mr. Ali, Mr. Speaker. On that fateful day, an unforgettable day, Mr. Speaker, Gestapo tactics were released on elected representatives of the people and was facilitated, Mr. Speaker, by the state. Elected members of parliament were physically assaulted, humiliated, berated, and most diabolical of all, Mr. Speaker, were prevented from going into the parliament to represent more than half of the adult population who voted
Honorable
for
Member,
us.
I will interrupt
Mr.
you at that
Speaker.
point. Honorable Member, at that point, because I made a statement on that.
That's your, Mr. Speaker,
Right.
your statement doesn't evade the fact that we were prevented from coming into the House. We were prevented by
Honorable
the state
Member,
police.
again, you're going to engage in an exchange after the Speaker rules, and I wouldn't allow it. If you want to continue, please change that trajectory.
Mr. Speaker, that is an irrefutable fact. And Mr.
Honorable
Speaker,
Member, again, I am refuting that fact. I did immediately after.
Mr. Speaker, that was what our great poet, Mr. Martin Carter, described as a dark time, a season of oppression. Evidence, Mr. Speaker, evidence of a budding dictatorship. Sir, permit me to make it abundantly clear to all and sundry that the APNU AFC will not be silenced either by the deployment of the Guyana Police Force or by any obstructionist tactics in this House. Mr. Speaker, I have been asked by the leader of the opposition to shadow a minister who was the Hobson's choice. The Hobson's choice for this very important ministry with a shared potential for fostering social cohesion on a national scale. Mr. Speaker, with influence over our nation's greatest asset, our young people. Mr. Speaker, I took the pleasure of rereading my 2020 speech, a speech in which, Mr. Speaker, I offered the minister who I know didn't want to be at that ministry. And by his daily actions to date, it appears that those feelings still persist. But nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, in Guyana's interest of our most prized possession, our youths, I provided the minister with very profound, cogent, and well thought out ideas for culture, youth, and sport. Advice and ideas, Mr. Speaker, with just an iota of effort and resources, would have germinated, would have matured, and would have had such a transformational impact, which would have engulfed the entire ministry and catapulted across this country like shooting stars. But, Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House have seen through the emperor's cloth in that minister. Mr. Speaker, I urge reduce ignorance, reduce levels of pomposity and unenvious arrogance, which have stunted the growth of the ministry and alienated the shared potential of that portfolio for social cohesion. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport did as much as possible in the last months to bully friendships and allegiance across different sports associations, even to the extent of weaponizing state resources such as funding and access to venues to get his way. While on the other hand, he has not yet, Mr. Speaker, published a youth, sport, or culture policy, nor has he published any established COVID-19 protocols developed with any sport association for the recommencements of sports in Guyana. This is reckless and places Guyana's sportsmen and women in risk. Mr. Speaker, the minister had a golden opportunity to formulate a vision and bring into being for the ministry by first recognizing our differences in ethnicity, religion, cultural practices, and talents in this country are what makes us unique in the region and the world. Mr. Speaker, it is our differences that offers immense potential to move the ministry beyond the sharing of balls, sports gears, keeping concerts, repairing age-old infrastructure, and ground enhancement. Mr. Speaker, those primitive initiatives are welcome. But compared to what can be achieved for culture, youth, and sport, I dare ask, Mr. Speaker, what has this minister done for culture, youth, and sports in the last 7 months? Mr. Speaker, if I attempt at an answer, I would say, given the ministry a very beautiful logo designed by my friend. Mr. Speaker, I put it to the Honorable Minister and hope that he can find and hope that he can recognize that it is our differences which sets us apart in the region, and it is time for us to forge a cultural identity that is Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, I call on the Honorable Minister to tell this House what is Guyana known for in the region culturally, as Jamaica is known for reggae, dancehall, their Creole language, Trinidad for soca music and carnival, etc. Mr. Speaker, I trust the minister will agree with me that it is time for brand Guyana. We must stand out in the region and the world with a cultural identity that is so unique, so distinct, and Guyanese to the bone, that we all as honorable members of this House and fellow Guyanese can be proud of. Mr. Speaker, we need to market our music, our culture, our foods, our cook-up rice that His Excellency bragged about, that it is his favorite meal, Mr. Speaker. Our pepper pot, our seven curry, all should be marketed as Jamaica markets their Blue Mountain coffee, their jerk chicken, Manish water, ackee and saltfish, or how Trinidad markets their doubles and bus-up shot. Mr. Speaker, it is time, and the time is now, Mr. Speaker, for brand Guyana in music, dance, poetry, culture, drama, theater, cultural tourism, and community tourism. This should also include new copyright legislation so that our talented artists, musicians, poets, and writers' intellectual properties can be protected. Mr. Speaker, clearly, the minister has a lot of work to do, and posing for photo opportunities will not get it done. Mr. Speaker, with the largest allocations for the ministry going to culture, I see nothing transformational, no futuristic project to forge Guyana's cultural identity. The award of a mere 1.5 million to Theatre Guild that teaches the fundamentals of drama, acting, etc. to our young people shows the government's position on culture. Mr. Speaker, these are some of the skills our young people need, which can be learned in the safety and comfort of their homes during this COVID-19 pandemic on a virtual platform. Sir, now is not the time for hosting physical youth summits and forums to place the lives of our young people at risk and the lives of those most vulnerable who they live with. Mr. Speaker, this government and this absent-minded minister don't have a clue or care about culture, except to exploit it on ethnic and racial issues. Mr. Speaker, youth. Our young people remains our nation's most valuable asset and resource. It goes without saying that skills training is pivotal in preparing them not only for the world of work, but for the new and emerging working environment COVID-19 has presented. This is why, Mr. Speaker, the coalition invested heavily in the Kurokuru College, Board of Industrial Training, our technical institutes, ICT hubs across this country, robotics, programming, the Bartram Collins College for Public Servants, to name a few. All of these and more, Mr. Speaker, were done by the Granger administration because we value our young people. Mr. Speaker, the minister has failed to link the youth programs of his ministry with the ministries of Education, Human Services, and Labor, all of which has a youth component. It is why, Mr. Speaker, is this why, Mr. Speaker, the minister is silent on the closure of the Bartram Collins College for Public Servants, which affected hundreds of young people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when the call for justice for the young Henry Boys and Harry Singh, the minister was silent. The call by our young people for the fulfillment of the promise for free university education, the minister is silent. Mr. Speaker, on important matters for Guyana's youth, there is a deafening silence and the minister is voiceless. Sports. Mr. Speaker, presently, the minister wants visit to the National Stadium to have his conference. So apart from sharing balls and sports gears as his flagship project, he now keeps a logbook of visitors to properties owned and controlled by his ministry. Control freakism, Mr. Speaker. Control freakism. Mr. Speaker, the minister, in his quest to be the patron of all sports associations in Guyana, sends out an ill-informed and intimidating letter in December 2020, telling associations not to discipline their errant members who partake in unsanctioned tournaments, lest they will not be in his good book. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Guyana Football Federation several days ago banned several national players who played in an unsanctioned tournament. I wonder what the minister will do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, can you imagine the GFF not getting clearance to organize football, but its national players in this COVID season are exposed in a tournament where no testing is mandatory? What should FIFA do to Guyana? This is a question the minister needs to answer. Sir, This type of management or lack thereof speaks directly to the qualities of this Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport and his real interest. He is willing and ready to leverage the influence of his office to punish all those who are unwilling to join him in his political escapades. How else can one explain the call to order by the ministry's missive released on the 6th of December 2020, which instructs sports associations in Guyana to turn a blind eye to infringement of their rules? It is a dastardly act, Mr. Speaker, an act which is a national disgrace to the extent that it compelled the president of the Guyana Olympic Association to pen a public letter enlightening the minister on the rules of engagements with local associations who are bound by international sporting rules. Mr. Speaker, one would hope that the Olympic Association's letter would be of help. But Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House know too well, Mr. Speaker, that the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It is the illusion of knowledge. And this is what presently haunts the Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport in his quest to show that he's in charge, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister said sports is his #1 priority, and he has had since August 2020, 7 months and 2 budgets later, to appoint members of the National Sports Commission, and nothing was done. Equally, Mr. Speaker, no appointment of a director of sport. Sir, I do not wish to explain to the minister of the importance of this individual to fill that vacancy. Mr. Speaker, we have seen the callous ineptitude of this administration in rewarding friends and cronies to important positions and offices in this country. Sir, this is probably why the minister is still awaiting permission from his boss for his turn to follow suit. Mr. Speaker, let us see if competence across different sports disciplines will be the criterion. Mr. Speaker, it would be a great thing for Guyana, Mr. Speaker, if a female director of sport who is eminently qualified is attached to that portfolio. Mr. Speaker, I am confident that all women MPs in this House will agree with me that we need to give more of our women opportunities to serve in the highest levels of leadership. Mr. Speaker, we welcome the improved allocations for sports, but new money without a structured plan is wasteful spending. You have the bulk of the money in 2021 capital budget, in the capital budget for repairs. Where is the new thinking, like remodeling two new grounds in each region in Guyana for cricket and football, specifically to have those sports played day and night in any weather? Note, Mr. Speaker, I am not advocating for petty repairs to selective grounds. Mr. Speaker, we need a plan that caters for all sports disciplines, from the primary, secondary to the tertiary levels, from the amateur to the semi-pro to the professional leagues. Mr. Speaker, we must work in sync with the Ministry of Education to formulate a plan, a program that caters for all levels of sport. And I know the Honorable Priya will accept such a proposal, but you have to engage the ministry, Mr. Speaker. Additionally, collaboration with sports organizations to formulate similar programs to cater for students' participation after school, on holidays and weekends, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we in Region 10 welcome the proposed investment of a new sporting facility the Chinese government offered to fund. We hope, sir, that the allocated sum in 2021 budget, some would be utilized to clear and prepare 20 acres of land at the Amelia's Ward Millie's hideout zone for the placement of that facility, where the space for parking, commerce, and other futuristic endeavors can be accommodated. Mr. Speaker, Region 10 undoubtedly is the talent basket of this country. We have provided this nation with some of the best athletes in sports, sportsmen and women of all categories, Mr. Speaker. We did all of those things with the least of much needed facilities. But, Mr. Speaker, those achievements came because of one of the most prized facilities, the Mackenzie Sports Club, that has morphed over the years into an all-purpose asset for different community events. Hence, it will be a great thing if the National Trust can provide the much-needed resources to upgrade the facility in recognition of its cultural heritage status to the community. Moreover, sir, we are happy that the final phase of the synthetic track the coalition brought to the community will be completed. But, Mr. Speaker, I call on the government to also consider for the next budget that the 5,000 seating capacity pavilion with modern amenities will also be an added feature to the track in the future. Those plans, Mr. Speaker, are already at the ministry. All that is required is the resources, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021, coined under the theme, A Path to Recovery, Economic Dynamism and Resilience, is in itself most confusing, for it lacks the cohesion of a clear vision for Guyana and a roadmap for continued and consistent development, as was achieved by the coalition under the judicious and astute leadership of an economic guru in that of Mr. Winston Jordan. Mr. Speaker, there was a systematic developmental plan, year after year, which was in tandem with Guyana's consistent economic growth pattern. Mr. Speaker, when one dissects the political toxic rhetoric in the minister's 5 hours plus speech, captured in the 77-page document, you will have a greater appreciation for why I said what I said. Mr.
Honorable
Speaker,
Member, could you just allow us to move the extension so that we can go beyond the clock?
you are
We
the boss,
5
sir.
minutes. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that we suspend the standing order 11 to continue beyond that.
Thank you very much, Honorable Prime Minister. And I put a question that the standing orders be suspended so we can complete the business of today. Those in favor say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Honorable Member, you get back your time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that extended 5 minutes. Mr. Speaker, the PPP boasted and made promises in their unseen manifesto, or should I say on their campaign posters, about 50% increases for public servants in their first 100 days plan. 2 budgets later, Mr. Speaker, 2 budgets later, not a blind cent, not even the ritual 5% pittance for thousands of hard-working public servants who are struggling in these COVID-19 times. Mr. Speaker, it was with the widening of the tax base of the coalition allowed for increases in salaries for public servants. But today, Mr. Speaker, to be a public servant under the PPP government, you are an endangered person that is politically exposed. You are likely to be treated with disdain or fired, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I join with my colleagues, not in asking the Honorable Minister of Finance to honor this 50% increase promise, but more so to accept our proposal of a 10% retroactive increase for all public servants. Sir, the PPP criticized and disapproved the adjustment of ministerial salaries in 2015. But on August 2nd, Mr. Speaker, August 2nd, 2020, they took those same salaries quietly and offered nothing to public servants. Mr. Speaker, I will not venture to call them hypocrites or charlatans, which the people have now
If
seen
you try
what they
that,
are
we will
for.
stop you for unparliamentary language.
I never call it.
I said if you do that, we will stop you.
Mr. Speaker, The coalition increased public servant salaries by 77% during its time. The lives of public servants were made better and job security was assured, Mr. Speaker. This budget, Mr. Speaker, is indeed designed for the ordinary people to get hell while the PPP and their cronies do well. Mr. Speaker, the PPP regime promised $50,000 increase for senior citizens' pension. 2 budgets later, Mr. Speaker, 2 budgets later, only $4,500. And they have given a false impression to the populace as if they are giving them $25,000. It is $4,500 you are giving senior citizens. Another empty promise, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the biggest so-called promise is the creation of 50,000 jobs. We are now left to wonder, Mr. Speaker, if it meant 50,000 less jobs, with close to 2,000 public servants fired in this COVID pandemic, many of whom, Mr. Speaker, were young people, many of whom, Mr. Speaker, were women, many of whom, Mr. Speaker, were the sole breadwinners of their homes. Sir, I have been informed that GWI is also planning to send home hundreds of additional public servants across the country. I really hope, Mr. Speaker, that this is misinformation. Mr. Speaker, His Excellency told this nation on the 11th of February 2021 that Guyanese should not be poor, but Mr. Speaker, he leads a government and a party that has pursued a vicious vendetta against one particular ethnic group of Guyanese in this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that does not go in tandem with Islamic beliefs. Muslim, one who submits to Allah, one who submits to Almighty God. Don't treat people like that, Mr. Speaker. Don't supervise over the unemployment of single mothers. Don't supervise over the unemployment of the poor, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over 90% of public servants fired by this administration are of one ethnicity. It is no secret, Mr. Speaker, and even though some may not want to accept, the reality is the ethnic makeup of the public sector, Mr. Speaker, is abundantly African Guyanese. Policemen, army, doctors, teachers, firemen and women. Sir, all the ministries, departments, and institutions in this country, African Guyanese plays an important role in keeping the engine of government and economic and commerce functioning, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, African Guyanese are the biggest consumers of private sector goods and services. But Mr. Speaker, this is how the Ali administration is treating hard-working, honest Guyanese, firing them. What a shame, Mr. Speaker. Is this what a caring government does to its citizens? Mr. Speaker, this one Guyana His Excellency talk about will not be achieved by fanciful speeches and selective tokenism of members of this community. Mr. Speaker, this one Guyana part of the President's speech, this one Guyana part, Mr. Speaker, is one of the most confusing parts because his words are not formulated into policies, nor does it show itself in the actions of the government that he is leading, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since this regime was placed in control of national matters, Guyanese fishermen are now experiencing troubling times of earning a living from their trade due to Venezuela's illegal aggression in Guyana's exclusive economic zone of the Equitable River. Mr. Speaker, while the government continues to showcase its inability to manage properly to secure our borders, Venezuelan gangs regularly invade our bordering communities, spotting and committing armed robberies. Mr. Speaker, the government continues to show callous regard for the protection of our sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, this is mind-boggling that the government would rely on a domestic aircraft pilot and guest house operator as its national security advisor. Seriously, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, a former Army captain who retired decades ago is in charge of national security matters in the 21st century. What a
Honorable
joke,
member,
Mr.
I
Speaker.
think you're going to have to withdraw that because as far as I know, the person you're alluding to is advisor. Advisor. Advisor doesn't make you in charge. I'm advisor to His Excellency.
So guided, Mr. Speaker. I am still fearful, Mr. Speaker, that a man who has left the force so many decades ago in this 21st century is advising the government on matters of national security. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, I see this as a gross disrespect to my fellow Londoner, a man, a former brigadier of the armed forces, the Honorable Prime Minister, who instead of addressing the need of improving Guyana's defense capabilities, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, he is tasked to speak about soft COVID enforcement regulations to open business. Really, Mr. Speaker, how can we take this installed administration seriously? Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Prime Minister needs to engage in areas of his expertise and come out of this COVID chaos the three ministers of health has created for this country, placing the safety of every Guyanese at risk.
Honorable
Mr.
members,
Speaker,
so we can allow you to safely proceed, you need an extension. Honorable member, sorry. Yes.
Current Speaker, do move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Member Mr. Jones. Honorable Member Mr. Figueroa, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Foreign policy. Mr. Speaker, we were regaled by the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs in his presentation, where he enlightened us and reminded us that this is Black History Month and that Black Lives Matter. Mr. Speaker, but what the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs has made very clear and lucid to this entire House, Mr. Speaker, is that he has personified what an Uncle Tom is, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I dare say that the Honorable Minister do not possess the sagacity nor the experience to speak on matters of blackness in this country. He, Mr. Speaker, should remain quiet because he is a tokenism of the PPP administration, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Guyana's international security and its foreign policy was never in a chaotic situation under the Granger administration. This is the cost that Guyana is paying for discarding the programs of the coalition government and working with the promise of Mr. Mike Pompeo to publicly say Venezuela must have democratic reform. Where, Mr. Speaker, why did we disband our non-interference in the sovereignty affairs of other countries? What happened to the position we would have taken, Mr. Speaker, not to be pawns of the East nor pawns of the West? Mr. Speaker, the government recently had to eject a Taiwan investment office after it had opened in Guyana. This level of disrespect shown by the PPP to one of our most formidable friend and ally, a relationship forged under the mutual respect with the Burnham administration several decades ago with our Chinese counterpart, could have been fractured, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this rumshop policy that is externally directed can internally be costly to the country. Education, Mr. Speaker. The reintroduction of the 5Bs program, which, Mr. Speaker, which offers a 15,000 cash grant, will be accepted, Honorable Priya. It will be accepted by parents without question. After all, Mr. Speaker, it is free money. And moreover, most of those recipients were not recipients of the COVID cash grant. and they are still in possession of the pink slip. So I, along with my colleagues, will encourage them, Mr. Speaker, to take that grant. But, Mr. Speaker, I maintain that most parents and teachers who will benefit, Mr. Speaker, from this allocation have agreed in principle that the David Granger 5B's program was a much more superior one. Mr. Speaker, this is not a well thought out program. So I ask the government, Mr. Speaker, if they really care, it would be a sensible thing, Mr. Speaker, to stop trying to undo the coalition's good because it was not conceived by the PPP. Students are in need of ready access to schools. Boats, buses, bicycles, Mr. Speaker, help those kids tremendously. They are also in need of book bags, notepads, data, and hot meals. Mr. Speaker, it has to be a continuous effort, not a one-off program. So I call on the Honorable Minister of Education to give this program a second look. A lot of parents are struggling, Honorable Priya, in these difficult COVID-19 times. Mr. Speaker, Gaisuku. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Agriculture told the world in 2020 that Guyana is selling sugar at a financial loss to all of its foreign buyers. Thus, one does not have to guess why PPP continues to prop up Gaisuku with billions of dollars every month, Mr. Speaker. Gaisuku was allocated $7 billion between August to December 2020. And now, Mr. Speaker, in a further $2 billion to subsidize the cost of sugar for wealthy nations, Mr. Speaker. So after 7 months in office, the PPP gives Gaisuku $1.3 billion a month. This allows Gaisuku to produce sugar at 38 US cents per pound, but sells it to Europe and the US for $16 a pound. Imagine, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, you will have to conclude.
In concluding, Mr. Speaker, in concluding, for the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sport, Mr. Speaker, I further recommend for the Minister's serious consideration that the Ministry of Sport should give each registered sporting association an annual cash grant that is equivalent to 15% of its annual budget, using the average, Mr. Speaker, of the last 5 years. Mr. Speaker, the minister should leave his ball sharing, logbook checking to his personal assistant. The repairs of aged fence, washrooms, etc. can be carried out by the Sports Commission or the National Trust. Mr. Speaker, the minister should concentrate on initiatives, new transformative projects across his portfolio. The minister should
Honorable
as
member,
soon as, Mr. Speaker,
you should concentrate in saying thank you.
the minister, Mr. Speaker, should publish the ministry's sport, youth, and culture policy for public consultation. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the minister should fast track his recognition that the differences, Mr. Speaker, the differences in which...
Thank you, Honorable member. Your time has gone 2 minutes ago.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable member, Ms. Veerasamy, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please allow me to congratulate the Honorable Dr. Ashley Singh, Senior Minister within the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, for delivering so eloquently his not so lengthy speech describing his visionary, people-oriented budget, one that has something for every Guyanese. withstanding occupation, gender, race, class, or geography. I would like to thank the staff of the Ministry of Finance and the staff of all governmental agencies responsible for the preparation of budget estimates. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to be part of this journey embarked upon by the People's Progressive Party civic government, taking governance to a higher level, exposing corruption, rooting out racism, while fulfilling our manifesto promises to transform the lives of Guyanese. Budget 2021 is a fine example of what people-centered budget should be like. Mr. Speaker, I would like to commend our young dynamic president, His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali, for delivering on his promise to rebuild Guyana and to take it to highest socio-economic and political levels. His understanding of the past and present dynamics motivated him to initiate the process of healing our hearts by creating a new social consciousness in Guyana through his Oneness platform, where generations to come can dream of living in real harmony. Mr. Speaker, let us all join His Excellency to transform our country into one where our people can live and work together as one in love and unity. Mr. Speaker, before I continue with my presentation, I would like to note a point. Over the last few days, I have been listening to all the speakers, most of the time, and there are a few things that came to my attention. And one of them, my honorable colleagues on the opposition side generally condemn the budget. But yet, some of them said we replicated many of their programs in the budget. So they are condemning their own the things we say that they say we replicated. So some of them reached out and made many requests. Some of them claim that it has no vision. I am really, honorable members, I am actually very confused because if this budget lacks something, then come up with a plan, the extent to which the Minister of